Thank you. I just have one or two final questions. In December of last year, the Treasury Department imposed sanctions under the Global Magnitsky Program targeting individuals and companies involved in human trafficking abuses. One set of actions targeted forced labor aboard distant water fishing vessels operating out of China. The other targeted a national of the Philippines for sex trafficking and the rape of young girls. So, Ambassador, given the global Magnitsky sanctions and other targeted sanction programs are only rarely used for human trafficking, is this something we can expect to see more actions like these in the future? And can you tell us what role you see for increasing the use of targeted sanction tools in the broader U.S. effort to address human trafficking?
Thank you, Senator. I believe that using the use of these sanctions is one important tool. We shouldn't put all of our eggs into that one basket, but it is absolutely an important tool. And the TIP office is responding to that by actually creating a specialized individual in our office, a very senior, knowledgeable, whip-smart Foreign Service officer who is focused exclusively on identifying additional targets for global Magnitsky sanctions. We were very heartened to see that several of the successful sanctions did involve forced labor, the ones that you pointed out, and so we are actually putting additional effort. But please know that while we put that in and we are aggressively seeking additional names to seek global Magnitsky sanctions, we are not putting all our eggs. This is something that we are doing in addition to the TIP report, our programming, our bilateral and multilateral diplomacy.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you another question. Migrant laborers are 3 times more likely to be trafficked than others are. How's the State Department addressing the trafficking of migrant laborers, given they're often difficult to track and too frightened to share their experiences? And do you know when the administration's global labor strategy will finally be released?
With regard to your first question regarding migration, I am grateful to you for bringing it up, and I appreciate your focus on this because we absolutely do know that migrants are uniquely vulnerable to human trafficking. They have many of the characteristics that human traffickers are seeking. They're afraid to call the police. They're on the move. They're desperate. They don't necessarily have a plan. Our part, the trafficking in persons part in addressing the unique vulnerabilities to trafficking of migrants is several-fold. One is we are tracking the risks not only in the home countries but along the migration pathways, and then we are engaging in intense bilateral and multilateral diplomacy and discussions with those countries so that they are aware of their own risks. And we've actually pulled them out in the Trafficking in Persons report. We use that TIP report in our discussions with them to show here is where you have areas of risk. In addition, we are specifically encouraging these countries that are along the migration route to do a better job of screening migrants, referring them to services, and then making sure that comprehensive services actually are available for those who do show signs of being trafficked. We are also using our foreign assistance in a very targeted way to make sure that we are actually supporting some of the regional approaches. We recognize that migration is not something that the United States is going to solve alone. We have got to have not only a whole of government approach, but a whole of region approach. And so we're really working closely with our allies and countries and partners in the region. And the last thing that we're doing is making sure that as we are creating safe, legal migration, as we're creating lawful migration pathways, we want to make sure that those pathways do not have inherent vulnerabilities built into them. We want to make sure there's no ability to have extreme labor recruitment fees so that when they come into the U.S., they owe so much money that that can be used against them. We want to make sure that they're not inappropriately tied to a specific worker and that they can leave if there's an abuse. And so once again, I feel like this is sort of a whole comprehensive response, and we're doing our best to make sure that we have this really balanced approach.
And the global labor strategy is part of that?
Thank you, sir. I actually checked on that before I came because I thought you might ask. It has not been released yet, and I do not have a specific time frame on when it is coming. I know it is being worked on, and I'm happy to get back with you to let you know the latest update.
I'd appreciate knowing that. Finally, Mr. Walsh, we know that lack of protections for workers can drive human trafficking. If we hope to end forced labor, we have to increase our focus not just on prosecutions, from my perspective, but on support for workers' rights. We know worker-driven social responsibility programs can prevent human trafficking. What are your views on that, and is USAID using resources and pivoting programs to invest more in expanding labor rights?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I would say our flagship worker rights program is the Global Labor Program, which you've been amazing supporters of for decades now. That works all over the world, especially to support unions, other forms of collective bargaining organization. But we have tried to, a couple years ago when the Global Labor Program increased by a few $1 million, we tried to use it to get at some of the most vulnerable populations that we maybe weren't getting at before and who often don't have access to the traditional tools of organization. So it's kind of two nascent programs. One is in East Africa and one's in Southeast Asia, and they target migrant workers who often are in the informal economy. Sometimes you could call it the gig economy. And it gives them tools to report abuses that may or may not cross the line into trafficking literally, but are often quite abusive. It provides services to them, whether it's legal assistance, the kinds of medical and mental help that I referenced before. And then in East Africa, it's focused especially on, again, migrant, often informal economy workers, but who are often women or people with disabilities, so really the most vulnerable, and trying to provide those same services. And I would also just say that under the Global Labor Program, there've been a lot of questions about the Uyghurs, Xinjiang, one of, if not the defining human rights atrocities of our age. And something that USAID is trying to do is to focus really on the forced labor part of this problem. And so I would kind of echo what Ambassador Dyer said in that the devilishly complicated part of this is how tangled, marbled supply chains are and how difficult it can be to find where the forced labor is. And so we are trying to help solve that problem by commissioning what I would say is some of the most useful action-oriented research that I've ever come across in my government career. And it aims at, first we did this for the cotton industry, which is central in Xinjiang, and then we did it for the automotive industry, different parts of the automotive industry. And it's aimed at finding what factories, what companies, what specific facilities either are demonstrably employing forced labor or are very suspicious to be. There are others who've done this work on the outside for other industries, but it is so important to have a lot of eyes on this problem, identifying specifics. And that's both inside and outside of China, because a lot of times the supply line or the use of forced labor is somewhere else. With that information in hand, it gives us the ability to start advocacy and to start going to companies to break themselves free of this enormous blight on their operations, sometimes to work with governments to shut down loopholes or individual areas. So it's kind of a two-part play, find the forced labor and then go after it. But I think we can make kind of an outsized contribution with a relatively small amount of money in this way.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I was a purchaser of supplies, anything I saw from Xinjiang would raise my antenna. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that you have 1 million Uyghurs in a concentration camp. There's a high probability that you're going to end up with trafficked products and supplies. Senator Rich?
No, nothing further, Mr. Chairman, except to say thank you. You guys are doing heaven's work. There's no question about it. We appreciate what you do.
Well, on behalf of the committee, we thank you both for your testimony. Thank you for the very insightful, Ambassador, aspects you gave, and very succinct. I think you should give the State Department a course on how to answer questions that are substantive at the end of the day. They would very well avail themselves.
There's a couple other agencies you can include.
Senator Vish suggests there are other agencies as well. I'll be just happy if you can get the State Department to do that. So the record for this hearing will remain open until the close of business on Friday, June 23rd. Please ensure that questions for the record are submitted no later than tomorrow. And with the thanks to the committee, this hearing is adjourned.